Narcissists can experience a deeper emotional impact from one particular response than they do from simple no contact. To understand why, you have to look at the complicated way they approach relationships and breakups. In the beginning, many narcissists create an intense fantasy around their partner. They may idealize them, make them feel special, and build a story where the relationship seems almost perfect. But over time, that image can fade, and their true patterns begin to appear. The aftermath of leaving a narcissistic relationship can feel like walking away from a powerful emotional storm. There is confusion, pain, and exhaustion left behind. Many people struggle to understand what happened because they were attached to the version of the relationship they were first shown. When a relationship with a narcissist ends, the emotional aftermath can reveal a lot about their inner world. Whether you choose to go, no contact, remove them from your life, or they cut off communication themselves, the experience can feel overwhelming. Many narcissists are the ones who initiate breakups because they believe they can always return whenever they want. They leave their partners feeling uncertain, hoping for answers, or waiting for another chance. But sometimes the person who has been hurt reaches a point where they decide they have had enough and choose to walk away first. Making that decision requires strength because leaving a narcissistic relationship often means accepting that the person you hoped they would become may never appear. A major part of understanding narcissistic relationships is recognizing how they often view their partners in the beginning. They may see someone as a person who will finally understand them, save them, or fix the pain they carry inside. They may believe that your love, patience, and loyalty can heal their wounds. But eventually, reality becomes clear. One person cannot repair another person's unresolved issues. You are not responsible for transforming someone who refuses to face themselves. You cannot love someone into emotional maturity. Narcissistic patterns usually require deep personal work, accountability, and professional support. A relationship cannot replace the inner healing they avoid. Your role was never to rescue them from themselves. One of the things that affects narcissists the most after a breakup is not always anger, arguments, or revenge. It is often your lack of reaction. When you stop giving them emotional energy, attention, and validation, they lose access to something they depended on. Many narcissists thrive on feeling important in someone else's world. When they realize you are no longer chasing, explaining, or trying to prove your worth, it can deeply challenge their sense of control. Your calmness becomes something they cannot easily manipulate. They may expect emotional reactions because those reactions reassure them that they still have influence. But when you become emotionally detached and focused on your own life, the dynamic begins to change. Healing after a relationship with a narcissist requires understanding these patterns instead of becoming trapped by them. After the breakup, narcissists often shift their attention quickly because they seek a new source of admiration and validation. This does not always mean they have processed what happened or genuinely moved on. It may simply be another way of avoiding self-reflection. Understanding this behavior helps you stop taking their actions personally and allows you to reclaim your emotional independence. The goal is not to win against them or make them suffer. The goal is to stop allowing their behavior to control your peace, your confidence, and your future. One of the hardest things about ending a relationship with a narcissist is the lack of real closure. Many people hope for an honest conversation, an apology, or some acknowledgement of the pain they caused. But narcissists often struggle with endings because closure requires accepting responsibility and letting go of control. A final conversation may not provide the peace you are searching for because they may avoid accountability or shift blame. Sometimes the closure you need comes from accepting the reality of the relationship rather than waiting for them to explain it. Choosing silence, creating distance, and refusing to participate in unhealthy cycles can become a powerful way of protecting yourself and moving forward. When you stop engaging with the old patterns, you begin taking your power back. A powerful shift happens when someone reaches a point where the narcissist's actions, reactions, and whereabouts no longer control their emotions. Narcissistic individuals often depend on emotional reactions because attention and emotional investment make them feel significant. When you detach yourself and stop responding to their attempts to provoke you, something changes. What once gave them influence over you begins to disappear. Even after a breakup, some narcissists may look for signs that you are hurting. They may watch your social media, search for evidence that you miss them, or look for emotional reactions that confirm they still matter in your life. This is why taking a temporary break from social media after separation can be a powerful step toward protecting your peace and rebuilding yourself. After a breakup, some narcissists may try to maintain access to your life in indirect ways. They might create unfamiliar accounts, send requests from suspicious profiles, or find small ways to monitor what you are doing. Their goal is often not genuine connection, but a desire to know whether they still have an emotional impact on you. Indifference can be extremely difficult for them to accept because it removes the reaction they are looking for. When you no longer care about their opinions, choices, or attempts to get your attention, they lose the feeling of control they once had. Your silence and emotional stability can affect their ego because they are forced to face the reality that they no longer occupy the same position in your mind. It does not matter who ended the relationship first. A narcissist may initially feel powerful if they believe they made the decision or still have access to you whenever they want. However, that feeling can change when they discover they can no longer see your updates, reach you whenever they choose, or influence your emotions. Seeing you continue your life, regain your confidence, and appear genuinely happy can become difficult for someone who expected you to remain emotionally attached. The end of a relationship with a narcissist often reveals deeper patterns of control, attachment, and manipulation. Healing begins when you recognize these patterns and stop allowing their behavior to define your emotional state. Protecting your peace requires boundaries, distance, and the willingness to choose yourself. Dealing with narcissistic people becomes more complicated when the connection cannot be completely removed, such as in family situations or co-parenting relationships. In these circumstances, many people use a method often called gray rocking. This approach involves becoming emotionally neutral and refusing to provide the emotional reactions a narcissist may be seeking. Instead of defending yourself, arguing, or explaining your feelings repeatedly, you respond in a calm and limited way. While it may seem simple, this technique can be very effective because it removes the emotional fuel that often keeps manipulative interactions going. When you stop reacting to their criticism, insults, or attempts to create conflict, you become much harder to control. As you emotionally distance yourself, the narcissist may begin to notice that their usual methods no longer work. The attention, emotional energy, and reactions they once received are no longer available. Over time, you may become less interesting to them because the emotional reward has disappeared. However, this can create another confusing pattern. If they find another person who provides admiration and validation, they may temporarily shift their focus away from you. But later, they may attempt to return, not necessarily because they have changed, but because they want to see if they can still trigger the same emotions they once had access to. This push and pull cycle can repeat many times, making narcissistic relationships feel unpredictable and emotionally exhausting. Understanding these patterns is an important part of personal growth and emotional recovery. Many people find strength through different sources of wisdom, including psychological knowledge, personal reflection, and spiritual teachings that emphasize humility, self-respect, forgiveness, and accountability. Building a healthier life after narcissistic experiences requires learning how to set boundaries, trust yourself again, and recognize that love does not require losing your identity. When you remain calm and emotionally grounded in the face of manipulation, you communicate something powerful. Their ability to control your emotions is gone. For someone who views relationships through the lens of influence and power, this loss of control can be deeply unsettling. Your emotional independence becomes the strongest statement you can make. When a narcissist realizes that they can no longer pull you into arguments, guilt, or confusion, they are forced to confront the fact that their influence has weakened. Sometimes this may lead them to increase their efforts to regain attention, while other times it may cause them to step away. Either way, your focus should remain on your own healing rather than their reaction. The greatest victory is not making a narcissist suffer. It is reaching a place where their behavior no longer determines your happiness. If you have experienced narcissistic discard or chosen no contact, remember that maintaining your composure and rebuilding your life are powerful acts of self-respect. Healing is possible, and your future can become stronger than the pain you left behind. The idea of emotional detachment refers to reaching a point where another person's actions no longer have the same power over your inner world. It does not mean becoming cold, heartless, or completely disconnected from emotions. Instead, it means creating a healthy distance where you can observe someone's behavior without immediately reacting from pain, anger, fear, or the need for approval. In relationships with narcissistic individuals, emotional detachment can be difficult because the connection often involves intense highs and lows. The constant cycle of affection, disappointment, confusion, and emotional tension can create a strong attachment. When someone finally steps away from that cycle and stops allowing the narcissist's behavior to determine their mood or self-worth, they begin to regain control over themselves. Emotional investment is another important concept because it explains why certain relationships can feel so consuming. When you invest your time, energy, attention, and emotions into someone, their actions naturally begin to affect you. In healthy relationships, this emotional investment creates closeness and trust. However, in unhealthy dynamics, one person may use that investment to maintain influence. A narcissistic person may become accustomed to receiving constant reassurance, attention, or emotional reactions from their partner. When that source of emotional energy is reduced, the dynamic changes. The person who was once constantly available becomes more focused on their own peace, and this shift can completely change the balance of the relationship. The concept of validation is also central to understanding narcissistic behavior. Validation means receiving confirmation, recognition, or approval from others. Everyone needs some level of validation because humans naturally seek connection and acceptance. The problem begins when someone depends heavily on external validation to maintain their sense of importance or identity. A narcissistic person may constantly seek admiration because it temporarily protects them from feelings of insecurity or inadequacy. When someone stops providing that admiration, the narcissist may feel challenged because the external source that supported their self-image is no longer available. The idea of control in relationships is often connected to emotional influence. Control does not always appear as obvious commands or restrictions. Sometimes it appears through guilt, emotional pressure, criticism, withdrawal of affection, or creating situations where another person feels responsible for keeping the relationship stable. In a narcissistic dynamic, control can come from knowing exactly how to trigger emotional responses. When someone learns to recognize these patterns and stops reacting in predictable ways, they interrupt the cycle. The narcissist may feel confused because the methods that once worked no longer create the same result. The term gray rocking describes a communication approach where a person becomes emotionally neutral when interacting with someone who tries to provoke reactions. The idea is that a gray rock does not attract attention because it is ordinary and uninteresting. In the same way, someone using this method avoids giving dramatic emotional responses, unnecessary explanations, or arguments. They keep conversations simple, calm, and focused only on what is necessary. This does not mean accepting disrespect or allowing mistreatment. It means refusing to provide emotional fuel for unhealthy interactions. This approach can be especially useful when complete separation is impossible, such as situations involving family members, work relationships, or co-parenting. No contact refers to intentionally creating distance from someone by ending communication and removing opportunities for continued emotional involvement. It is often used after painful or unhealthy relationships because constant interaction can reopen emotional wounds and keep old patterns alive. However, no contact is not about punishing another person. It is about creating space for healing, reflection, and rebuilding your own identity. It allows someone to stop focusing on what the other person is doing and start focusing on their own recovery. The true purpose of no contact is not to make someone miss you. It is to help you become emotionally free. The idea of narcissistic supply refers to the attention, admiration, praise, emotional reactions, or sense of importance that some narcissistic individuals seek from others. The term is often used to describe the external reinforcement that helps maintain their confidence or self-image. This supply can come from positive attention, but it can also come from conflict and strong emotional reactions. For some people with narcissistic traits, even anger or frustration from another person can feel like proof that they still have influence. When someone becomes calm, unavailable, and emotionally independent, that source of reinforcement becomes weaker. The process of rebuilding yourself after a narcissistic relationship involves developing boundaries. Boundaries are the personal limits you create to protect your emotional, mental, and physical well-being. They communicate what behavior you will accept and what behavior you will no longer tolerate. Healthy boundaries are not about controlling another person. They are about controlling your own choices and responses. When boundaries become stronger, you stop feeling responsible for managing someone else's emotions and start taking responsibility for your own peace. The deeper lesson behind all of these concepts is that healing comes from reclaiming your own identity. The moment you stop measuring your worth through someone else's reactions, you begin to experience freedom. A person who once had the ability to create confusion, anxiety, or emotional exhaustion no longer holds the same power. The focus shifts from trying to understand every move they make to understanding yourself, your needs, and your future. That transformation is where true recovery begins. The idea of indifference is often misunderstood because it does not mean hatred, revenge, or pretending that you never cared. True indifference is a state where someone's actions no longer control your emotions or decisions. It is the moment when you stop checking for their reactions, stop wondering what they are thinking, and stop searching for signs that they still care. In difficult relationships, especially those involving manipulation, people can become trapped in a cycle of constantly analyzing another person's behavior. Indifference breaks that cycle because your attention returns to yourself. Instead of asking why someone treated you a certain way or whether they will come back, you begin asking what you need to feel peaceful and fulfilled. This shift represents emotional freedom because your happiness is no longer dependent on another person's choices. The term emotional regulation plays a major role in recovering from unhealthy relationship patterns. Emotional regulation means the ability to understand, manage, and respond to your emotions instead of being controlled by them. It does not mean ignoring your feelings or pretending that pain does not exist. It means learning how to experience emotions without allowing them to push you into reactions that harm your own well-being. In relationships with manipulative individuals, emotional regulation becomes powerful because they may expect predictable reactions. They may expect anger, desperation, explanations, or attempts to prove your value. When you learn to pause, process your emotions, and respond calmly, you take away the ability of another person to control your behavior. The concept of emotional triggers is also important because narcissistic dynamics often involve situations that create strong emotional reactions. A trigger is something that activates a powerful emotional response based on past experiences, fears, or unresolved wounds. For example, being ignored, criticized, or rejected may create feelings of anxiety or the urge to seek reassurance. Understanding your triggers allows you to recognize when your emotions are being activated and choose a healthier response. Instead of immediately reacting, you begin observing what is happening inside you. This awareness gives you the ability to break old patterns and avoid being pulled back into the same emotional cycles that caused pain in the past. The term manipulation refers to attempts to influence someone's thoughts, feelings, or actions in a way that benefits the person using the tactic. Manipulation can be obvious, but many forms are subtle and difficult to recognize. It may appear as guilt-tripping, shifting blame, creating confusion, giving affection, and then withdrawing it, or making someone feel responsible for another person's happiness. In unhealthy relationships, manipulation often creates a situation where one person constantly adjusts themselves while the other avoids accountability. Recognizing manipulation does not mean becoming suspicious of everyone. It means developing awareness so you can identify when a relationship is no longer based on mutual respect and honesty. The idea of intermittent reinforcement explains why some unhealthy relationships can become extremely difficult to leave. This happens when positive experiences and negative experiences are mixed together unpredictably. One moment, someone may receive affection, attention, and promises of change. The next moment, they may experience distance, rejection, or emotional pain. Because the positive moments appear unexpectedly, the person may continue hoping that the loving version of the relationship will return. This pattern can create a powerful emotional attachment because the mind keeps waiting for the next moment of connection. Understanding this cycle helps people realize that intense attachment does not always mean a relationship is healthy. Sometimes it is the result of an unpredictable emotional pattern. The idea of reclaiming your power is not about gaining control over another person. It is about returning control to yourself. In difficult relationships, people often lose touch with their own needs because they become focused on managing someone else's emotions, avoiding conflict, or trying to earn love and approval. Reclaiming your power means remembering that your feelings, choices, and boundaries matter. It means recognizing that you do not need to convince someone to value you. Your worth does not increase because someone chooses you, and it does not decrease because someone rejects you. True power comes from knowing who you are regardless of how another person responds. The concept of self-abandonment is another important part of understanding these relationships. Self-abandonment happens when someone repeatedly ignores their own feelings, needs, values, or boundaries in order to keep another person happy. They may excuse harmful behavior, minimize their own pain, or constantly adapt themselves to avoid losing the relationship. Over time, this can create emotional exhaustion because they are no longer living according to their own identity. Healing requires reconnecting with yourself and recognizing that a healthy relationship should not require you to disappear. Love should allow you to become more of who you are, not force you to become less. The journey after a narcissistic relationship is ultimately about rebuilding trust in yourself. Many people leave these experiences questioning their judgment because they spent so much time trying to understand someone else's behavior. But recovery comes from learning to trust your own observations, feelings, and instincts again. When you stop chasing explanations from the person who hurt you and start seeking understanding within yourself, a major transformation begins. The goal is not to forget what happened or deny the pain. The goal is to grow beyond it, become emotionally stronger, and create a future where your peace is protected by your own awareness and self-respect. The concept of narcissistic injury helps explain why certain situations can create such intense reactions from narcissistic individuals. A narcissistic injury occurs when something challenges the image they have created about themselves or threatens their sense of superiority, importance, or control. It is not simply about being hurt like any other person might feel hurt. It is often connected to a deeper struggle with accepting criticism, rejection, failure, or the possibility that they are not as powerful or perfect as they want others to believe. When someone stops seeking their approval, sets boundaries, or walks away confidently, it can challenge the identity they are trying to maintain. This is why losing influence over someone can feel especially uncomfortable for a person who depends heavily on external recognition. The idea of ego is also important when understanding narcissistic behavior. The ego is the part of our personality connected to our sense of self and identity. Having a healthy ego allows someone to understand their strengths and weaknesses while remaining open to growth. However, when someone has an inflated or fragile ego, they may become extremely protective of how they are perceived by others. A fragile ego can appear strong on the outside, but may actually depend on constant reassurance. When that reassurance disappears, the person may feel threatened. This is why a calm and confident response can sometimes have a stronger impact than arguments, because it removes the emotional reaction that the ego is trying to control. The term projection describes a psychological defense mechanism where someone places their own unwanted feelings, behaviors, or weaknesses onto another person. Instead of facing their own mistakes or insecurities, they may accuse someone else of having those same qualities. For example, someone who avoids accountability may constantly blame others for problems. Projection allows a person to protect their self-image by shifting uncomfortable truths onto someone else. Understanding projection helps people stop accepting false accusations as reality. When you recognize that another person's words may reflect their own internal struggles rather than your actual character, you become less affected by their attempts to create doubt. The concept of blame shifting is closely connected to avoiding responsibility. In a healthy relationship, both people can acknowledge mistakes and work toward improvement. However, in unhealthy dynamics, one person may constantly redirect responsibility away from themselves. They may make you feel guilty for their actions, create excuses, or focus on your reaction instead of the original issue. Over time, this can cause someone to question their own perspective and take responsibility for problems they did not create. Recognizing blame shifting allows you to separate genuine accountability from emotional manipulation. You begin to understand that caring about someone does not mean accepting responsibility for everything they do. The term cognitive dissonance explains the mental conflict people experience when they hold two opposing beliefs at the same time. In narcissistic relationships, someone may struggle because they remember the loving moments while also experiencing painful behavior. They may think, this person can be kind, so why do they hurt me? Or they said they love me, so why do their actions feel damaging? This internal conflict can make it difficult to leave because the mind tries to protect the image of the person it became attached to. Healing often requires accepting the complete picture instead of focusing only on the good moments or only on the painful ones. The idea of trauma bonding is another important concept that explains why some people feel deeply connected to relationships that cause emotional pain. Trauma bonding can develop when periods of distress are mixed with moments of affection, comfort, or hope. The emotional highs and lows create a powerful attachment because the brain begins associating relief with the person who also caused the pain. This can make leaving feel extremely difficult, even when someone understands that the relationship is unhealthy. Breaking this cycle requires awareness, distance, support, and time. It involves learning that emotional intensity is not always the same thing as genuine love or compatibility. The concept of personal boundaries becomes especially important after experiencing manipulation or emotional confusion. Boundaries are the invisible lines that define what you will accept, how you expect to be treated, and what actions you will take to protect yourself. Without boundaries, people may repeatedly tolerate behavior that damages their emotional health because they fear conflict or losing the relationship. Strong boundaries are not acts of cruelty. They are expressions of self-respect. They communicate that your feelings, time, and energy have value. When you establish clear boundaries, you stop negotiating with behavior that repeatedly causes harm. The process of healing requires shifting your focus from the narcissist's behavior to your own personal growth. Many people spend months or years trying to understand why someone acted the way they did, hoping that finding the perfect explanation will finally bring peace. But true healing often begins when you realize that your recovery does not depend on their awareness, apology, or transformation. Your peace comes from accepting what happened, learning from the experience, and choosing a healthier path forward. The moment you stop waiting for someone else to change and start investing in yourself, you begin creating a life where your emotional stability is no longer controlled by another person.